Ladies and gentlemen, forgiveness is often hailed as a virtue, a noble act of letting go of past wrongs. But today, I want to talk about a more difficult but equally important subject. There are certain individuals we should not forgive. Now, I know this might sound counterintuitive, even controversial, but hear me out. In our society, we have come to believe that forgiveness is always the answer. But sometimes, forgiveness can enable toxic behavior, perpetuate harm, and allow wrongdoers to escape accountability. Today, I'll shed light on the individuals we should not forgive, those who have crossed the line beyond redemption. There is no room for forgiveness when it comes to those who cause harm through abuse, whether it be physical, emotional, or psychological. Abuse is a deliberate violation of a person's dignity, autonomy, and well-being. It's not just an isolated incident, but often a pattern of behavior designed to assert power, control, and dominance over another individual. The physical scars may heal over time, but the emotional and psychological wounds often linger much longer, if not indefinitely. The impact of abuse can resonate throughout an individual's life, affecting their ability to trust, their sense of self-worth, and their capacity to form healthy relationships in the future. When someone abuses another person, they cross a line that cannot be easily undone. They betray the sacred trust that one human should never exploit another in such a way. Physical abuse, for instance, leaves visible evidence of the violence inflicted, but the effects of emotional abuse, though often invisible, can be just as, if not more, destructive. Emotional abuse can tear down a person's confidence, manipulate their thoughts, and create a sense of dependence where the victim believes they cannot escape the torment. Those who engage in such behavior know full well the devastation they cause. The abuser intentionally manipulates their victim, sometimes using love, fear, or dependency as weapons to exert control. Over time, the victim may internalize the abusive treatment, leading to feelings of guilt, shame, and worthlessness. It's an insidious form of violence that goes unnoticed by many but leaves deep, lasting trauma. The scars of abuse also extend far beyond the victim themselves. Families, friends, and entire communities can be affected by the ripple effects of abuse. Relationships become fractured, trust is eroded, and entire networks can be torn apart as a result of one person's cruelty. It's not just about the immediate pain inflicted on the victim, but the long-term harm that reverberates through the lives of others who witness or are involved in the situation. Forgiving an abuser not only allows them to escape responsibility for their actions, but it can also enable the continuation of their behavior. Without consequences, there is little incentive for someone to change their ways. The abuser might see forgiveness as validation for their actions, reinforcing the idea that what they did was not as bad as it truly was, or that they can continue to harm others without fear of repercussions. By not holding them accountable, we send a message that abuse is tolerable, and that it is acceptable for one person to strip away the humanity of another. This sets a dangerous precedent, both for the victim and for society as a whole. True healing for the victim begins not with forgiveness, but with justice. It begins with the acknowledgement of the harm done, the understanding that what occurred was wrong, and the creation of an environment where such behavior is not allowed to persist. While healing may eventually come for the victim through therapy, support, and personal growth, the perpetrator's actions should not be excused, nor should they be given the opportunity to continue causing harm. In many cases, the abuse is not just an isolated incident but part of a larger pattern of violent behavior. Forgiveness in this context would be nothing more than an enabler, allowing the cycle of harm to perpetuate itself. Without intervention, the cycle is likely to continue, and more victims may suffer as a result. Thus, when it comes to those who abuse others, forgiveness is not an option. Justice is necessary to prevent further suffering and restore dignity to the person who was wronged. Individuals who perpetuate systemic discrimination, whether through racism, sexism, or any other form of social injustice, should not be forgiven for their actions because they contribute to a cycle of oppression that harms entire communities. These oppressors don't just make a mistake in judgment, they actively uphold and enforce structures of inequality that are deeply rooted in history and society. The harm caused by these individuals extends far beyond personal relationships. It is woven into the fabric of institutions, laws, and cultural norms. When people discriminate against others based on race, gender, or any other aspect of identity, they are complicit in the marginalization and dehumanization of entire groups of people. These acts are not isolated but part of a broader system that seeks to limit opportunities, deny access, and perpetuate a hierarchy where certain lives are valued more than others. Racism, for example, is not just a series of individual actions or attitudes, it is a pervasive system that operates on every level of society, economic, political, and social. A racist individual does not simply harm one person. Their actions reinforce a system that denies equal rights and opportunities to millions of people based on the color of their skin. This systemic racism ensures that people of color are disproportionately affected by poverty, limited access to education, healthcare, and justice. These structures are embedded in our history and continue to shape the experiences of marginalized groups today. When individuals perpetuate racism, they are not just being prejudiced on a personal level, they are upholding a legacy of oppression that spans generations and continues to harm communities at large. Similarly, sexism is not just an issue of personal attitudes towards women or men, but rather an ingrained societal structure that limits gender equality in virtually every area of life. From the workplace to the home, from healthcare to education, sexism ensures that women, non-binary individuals, and gender minorities face systemic barriers that hinder their personal and professional growth. The sexism perpetuated by individuals is compounded by institutional and cultural forces that reduce the opportunities available to those who do not conform to patriarchal expectations. These systems keep individuals in subservient roles and punish those who challenge traditional gender norms. When people engage in sexist behavior, they are not merely making personal decisions, they are contributing to the oppression of entire genders, making it more difficult for others to live freely and fully. The damage caused by discrimination is not just about the immediate pain inflicted on those directly affected, but the long-term harm to entire communities. Those who experience systemic oppression often face significant barriers in accessing quality healthcare, education, and employment opportunities. They may live in neighborhoods where the government has historically failed to invest, or they may be subjected to violence and discrimination at higher rates simply because of their identity. For individuals who experience racism or sexism daily, it is not just an occasional insult, it is a lifetime of hardship, struggle, and exclusion. It becomes ingrained in their psyche, their relationships, and their worldview. And the effects are felt across generations. As children grow up in environments where they see their parents, their neighbors, and their communities being marginalized and oppressed. When those who perpetuate these harmful systems are forgiven without consequence, it sends a message that their actions are acceptable, even if they are part of a larger pattern of injustice. Forgiveness in this context can minimize the true extent of the harm caused. Instead of addressing the root causes of inequality, forgiveness might allow the oppressor to continue their behavior unchecked, perpetuating the systems of racism, sexism, and other forms of discrimination that harm countless people. In the case of those who uphold or perpetuate systems of oppression, forgiving them without first dismantling these systems ensures that the suffering continues. It becomes clear that forgiveness cannot be granted to those who actively reinforce inequality and injustice, because doing so would allow the cycle of harm to persist. Furthermore, when we forgive those who perpetuate systemic discrimination, we risk silencing the voices of those who have suffered. Victims of oppression often feel that their pain and experiences are dismissed when the perpetrators are excused. The victims' struggles are minimized and their reality is invalidated. True healing cannot begin until the harm is acknowledged and addressed, not just on a personal level but on a societal scale. Forgiveness without justice allows the oppressors to maintain their power and status, leaving those who have been marginalized without a voice in the process of healing and rebuilding. Therefore, those who perpetuate systemic discrimination should not be forgiven until they recognize the harm they have caused and take steps to dismantle the very structures that enable their actions. Trust is the cornerstone of all relationships, whether personal, professional, or societal. It forms the foundation of how we connect, collaborate, and care for one another. When trust is broken, the damage can be profound and long-lasting, often making it incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to restore the bond that once existed. People who betray trust for selfish reasons, whether through dishonesty, fraud, manipulation, or any other form of deceit, cause harm that ripples far beyond the immediate incident. The act of betrayal undermines not only the individual relationship but also the broader concept of trust itself. Those who betray others for personal gain violate an unspoken social contract, one that allows people to feel safe and secure in their interactions with others. The breach of trust is particularly damaging because it shatters a fundamental belief that many take for granted, that others are honest and have good intentions. When someone lies or betrays another's confidence, it forces the victim to question the sincerity of future relationships. If you cannot trust those closest to you, how can you trust others? It creates a ripple effect that can lead to increased suspicion, cynicism, and a breakdown in social cohesion. Betrayal of trust, especially when it occurs in close personal relationships, often leaves a deep emotional scar. It creates a sense of isolation and vulnerability, making the victim feel exposed and betrayed by someone they once considered an ally or confidant. Whether it's a spouse, a friend, or a colleague, the emotional toll is significant. Those who have been betrayed are often left questioning their own judgment and feeling as though they have been taken advantage of in the most intimate way. One of the most damaging aspects of trust betrayal is that it frequently occurs without warning, leaving the victim blindsided and unprepared for the emotional turmoil that follows. In personal relationships, for instance, a partner may lie about something seemingly insignificant, but as it escalates into larger betrayals, the victim may feel deceived in ways they didn't anticipate. In the workplace, a colleague may undermine someone's efforts or take credit for their work, causing the victim to doubt their own worth or professional standing. Regardless of the context, betrayal distorts the very essence of the relationship, turning what was once a secure and stable foundation into a fragile, uncertain structure. This destabilization leaves the victim in emotional turmoil, struggling with feelings of betrayal, hurt, and anger. Trust, once broken, is incredibly hard to rebuild, and in many cases, it is never fully restored. Even if the person who betrayed the trust expresses remorse, the emotional damage is often too deep for forgiveness to be an easy remedy. When someone betrays trust, they often justify their actions as being necessary, or they minimize the impact of their deceit, dismissing the harm they have caused. These justifications can make it even harder for the victim to find closure or resolution. The perpetrator may attempt to gaslight the victim, making them doubt their own perceptions of the betrayal. In cases of fraud or manipulation, the person who caused the harm may try to present themselves as a victim of circumstance, attempting to absolve themselves of responsibility. This lack of accountability further deepens the wound. When someone betrays trust and shows no genuine remorse, it is not simply a matter of one person making a mistake, it is a clear indication of a character flaw that goes beyond the specific situation. Individuals who repeatedly betray trust, without acknowledging the harm they've caused, reveal a pattern of behavior that suggests they view others as tools to be used for their own benefit, rather than as equals deserving of respect and honesty. In relationships where trust is critical, such as in marriages, friendships, and professional settings, betrayal erodes the very essence of what those relationships are built on. In romantic relationships, for example, infidelity or deceit can destroy the emotional bond that once existed, leaving behind feelings of rejection and inadequacy. For those who value loyalty and emotional intimacy, such breaches create a profound sense of loss. The emotional investment that goes into building trust cannot be easily erased, and when it is destroyed, it can result in a sense of betrayal that is both painful and difficult to overcome. In the workplace, betrayal may come in the form of sabotaging a colleague's work or undermining their contributions, leading to an erosion of professional relationships and the breakdown of teamwork. These breaches cause a loss of respect and a breakdown in communication, both of which are essential to achieving collective success. Forgiveness in these situations is incredibly challenging. It requires not only a willingness to move beyond the hurt, but also an acknowledgement from the person who betrayed the trust that their actions were wrong and that they have made an effort to change. Without this understanding, forgiveness feels hollow and unjustified. Without genuine accountability, offering forgiveness may only serve to reinforce the harmful behavior, allowing the person who betrayed the trust to believe that their actions were acceptable or that there were no real consequences. In cases where trust has been repeatedly betrayed, forgiveness may no longer be a realistic or healthy option. The victim in this case may have to recognize that the trust has been irreparably damaged and that the relationship cannot continue in the same form. Sometimes the most compassionate and necessary action is to acknowledge that forgiveness is not possible and to walk away from the relationship entirely for the sake of one's emotional well-being. Moreover, when trust is betrayed without remorse or an effort to make amends, the victim may feel that they are being forced into a position where they must forgive in order to maintain peace or avoid conflict. This dynamic is particularly harmful, as it implies that the person who has been wronged is obligated to overlook their own pain and emotional suffering in favor of the perpetrator's comfort. Such situations often lead to resentment and unresolved anger, further deepening the emotional rift between the individuals involved. True forgiveness can only come when there is mutual understanding, a genuine expression of remorse, and a sincere desire to rebuild the trust that was broken. Without these elements, forgiveness may simply be a facade, masking deeper emotional wounds that will continue to fester and affect the individuals involved in unhealthy ways. Ultimately, the betrayal of trust is one of the most damaging actions a person can commit. It is a violation that goes beyond the individual relationship, affecting one's ability to trust others and to feel secure in the world. Those who betray trust for personal gain, without remorse or accountability, create a lasting rift that cannot easily be repaired. In these situations, forgiveness without real change can do more harm than good, allowing the cycle of betrayal to continue unchecked. There are few actions in the world more unforgivable than the harm done to children. The protection of innocence, safety, and well-being of the youngest members of society should be non-negotiable. When someone targets children for exploitation, abuse, or neglect, they not only rob the child of their right to a happy and secure childhood, but also inflict lasting psychological and emotional damage that can impact them for the rest of their lives. Children are inherently vulnerable due to their dependency on adults for care and protection. They trust that the adults around them will provide for their needs, guide them through life, and keep them safe from harm. When that trust is violated, it not only devastates the child, but also breaks down the foundational understanding of safety and love that is necessary for healthy emotional development. The trauma caused by those who harm children is so profound that it often leaves permanent scars, altering the course of their lives in ways that may never be fully healed. The harm caused by those who exploit children takes many forms, but perhaps the most egregious are cases of physical, sexual, and emotional abuse. Physical abuse leaves obvious signs of harm in the form of bruises, broken bones, or other visible injuries. But the damage goes far beyond what can be seen on the surface. A child who suffers physical abuse learns that the person who is supposed to love and protect them is the one who is causing them pain. This contradiction can cause a lifetime of emotional confusion and self-doubt as the child struggles to reconcile love with violence. Sexual abuse, on the other hand, is perhaps the most devastating form of harm to a child. It robs them of their sense of safety and bodily autonomy, often leaving them with deep feelings of shame, guilt, and a distorted sense of self-worth. The psychological consequences of sexual abuse can last for decades, leading to trust issues, difficulty in forming healthy relationships, and even physical health problems. Emotional abuse, though often invisible, is equally damaging. The consistent undermining of a child's self-esteem, the constant belittling or the neglect of their emotional needs leaves deep scars that are just as real and painful as any physical injury. These children often grow up with a distorted view of love, neglecting their own emotional needs and carrying forward patterns of self-doubt and depression. Even more troubling is the fact that many children who suffer harm at the hands of adults are too young to understand what is happening to them or how to speak out against it. This makes it especially difficult for them to seek help or even comprehend the abuse they are enduring. For children who live in environments where abuse is normalized, they may grow up believing that what is happening to them is acceptable or even deserved. These children often face significant barriers when trying to escape their abusers, including fear, confusion, and a lack of understanding of their rights. Some may even be coerced into silence, threatened with further harm if they speak out. The psychological impact of such abuse can create lifelong challenges, including issues with trust, attachment, and a sense of personal agency. Tragically, in many cases, these children grow up and become adults who repeat the cycle of abuse, having never had the opportunity to understand that what was done to them was wrong. In such situations, the harm caused is not just to one generation, but to entire family systems and communities, creating a perpetuating cycle of trauma that is passed down over time. Moreover, children who are neglected or abused are often deprived of their basic needs, including emotional support, education, and the opportunity to live in a safe and nurturing environment. Neglect can come in many forms, failing to provide adequate food, shelter, or medical care, leaving a child alone for long periods of time, or failing to offer the emotional warmth and connection necessary for healthy development. This deprivation of care leads to a range of developmental issues, including cognitive delays, emotional instability, and difficulty forming meaningful relationships later in life. The absence of emotional support can stunt a child's emotional growth, leaving them unable to cope with stress, express themselves appropriately, or regulate their emotions. As a result, these children may struggle in school, have difficulty making friends, and experience chronic feelings of loneliness and insecurity. Without proper care and nurturing, they may face lifelong challenges in their ability to trust others and form healthy attachments. In many ways, neglect is just as damaging as physical abuse because it deprives the child of the fundamental resources they need to thrive and grow. What makes harm to children even more unforgivable is the fact that those who commit these acts are often in positions of power and trust. Parents, caregivers, teachers, coaches, and other adults who have access to children are expected to safeguard their well-being. They are entrusted with their care, their development, and their safety. When these individuals exploit that power for their own selfish desires or fail to protect children from harm, they are committing one of the most heinous crimes imaginable. These adults have a moral and legal responsibility to care for the children in their lives, and when they violate that responsibility, they betray the most fundamental ethical duty of any adult. These acts of harm are particularly damaging because they involve a profound breach of trust, leaving the child with not only the direct impact of the abuse, but also the emotional weight of knowing that someone they trusted turned against them. This betrayal can make it even more difficult for the child to trust other adults in the future, leading to isolation, confusion, and a deep sense of vulnerability. Moreover, when the harm to children is ignored, minimized, or dismissed, it sends a dangerous message to society as a whole that the suffering of children is not as significant as that of adults, or that their voices don't matter. In many cases, society's response to child abuse is inadequate, either due to ignorance, denial, or a lack of resources to effectively address the issue. For example, child abuse cases are often underreported, and even when they are reported, they can be mishandled, leading to further harm. The victim may be returned to an abusive home, or the perpetrator may face minimal consequences. This lack of accountability only exacerbates the suffering of the child and undermines the effort to prevent future abuse. This is why it is essential that we as a society hold perpetrators of child abuse and neglect accountable to the fullest extent of the law. Society must prioritize the protection of children and ensure that those who harm them are held responsible for their actions, because when we fail to protect children, we are failing to protect the future of humanity itself. In conclusion, the harm caused to children is beyond forgiveness because it goes against the very essence of what it means to be human, to care for, nurture, and protect the vulnerable. The damage done to a child's psyche, body, and spirit can last a lifetime, leaving scars that are not only carried by the victim, but also affect future generations. Those who harm children in any way must be held accountable, and their actions cannot be dismissed or forgiven. The trauma they cause is too deep, and the consequences too far-reaching to allow forgiveness to perpetuate the cycle of abuse. The deliberate harm caused by those who engage in financial exploitation or fraud is one of the most unforgivable offenses, as it destroys not just the victim's financial stability, but also their sense of security, trust, and well-being. Money, while not the most important thing in life, is an essential tool for meeting basic needs, achieving personal goals, and creating a sense of independence. When someone intentionally defrauds or exploits another person for financial gain, they are stripping the victim of not only their resources but also their sense of autonomy. This type of harm is often premeditated, calculated, and done with the clear intention of taking advantage of the victim's trust, ignorance, or vulnerability. The victim may lose their savings, their home, or their livelihood, and the aftermath can be devastating. Those who engage in financial exploitation know the consequences of their actions. They understand that they are taking something irreplaceable from another person, often without remorse, and this deliberate exploitation makes the offense even more egregious. The impact of financial fraud or exploitation goes far beyond the immediate loss of money. It can result in long-lasting emotional and psychological trauma for the victim. When someone is financially taken advantage of, especially by someone they trust, it can lead to feelings of betrayal, shame, and humiliation. The victim may question their own judgment, wondering how they could have been so easily deceived. This self-doubt can be particularly damaging for individuals who have worked hard to save money or build financial stability. They may feel as though their entire life's work has been taken from them in an instant, and that they have little recourse to recover from the loss. The emotional toll of financial fraud can also result in depression, anxiety, and a diminished sense of self-worth. In severe cases, victims may experience PTSD-like symptoms, unable to trust others or make decisions without fear of being taken advantage of again. The perpetrator, knowing full well the psychological harm their actions will cause, commits an offense that extends beyond money and into the realm of personal identity and mental health. Furthermore, financial exploitation often leaves victims with little recourse for justice, particularly when the fraud is committed by someone in a position of trust, such as a financial advisor, family member, or business partner. The legal process to recover stolen funds can be long, difficult, and costly, and many victims are unable to recover their losses, especially if the perpetrator has gone to great lengths to hide their actions. The victim is left not only financially destitute, but also emotionally drained from fighting a legal battle that may not result in a fair outcome. In many cases, perpetrators of financial fraud go unpunished, leaving the victim with the bitter realization that there are few consequences for those who exploit the vulnerable. This lack of accountability further compounds the sense of injustice and adds to the trauma of the victim, who may feel that the system is not designed to protect them from those who prey on their financial vulnerabilities. The idea that someone can act with such malicious intent, cause irreparable damage, and walk away without significant repercussions is deeply disturbing and leaves the victim with a lasting sense of powerlessness. In addition to the individual harm caused by financial exploitation, this kind of deceit also has far-reaching effects on society. When financial fraud becomes widespread or normalized, it undermines the trust that people have in financial systems, institutions, and relationships. A society where fraud is prevalent is one where individuals begin to doubt the integrity of the financial markets, the government, and even personal relationships. This lack of trust can lead to a breakdown in social cohesion, as people become more suspicious and unwilling to engage with others for fear of being deceived or exploited. Trust is the foundation of all financial systems, and when that trust is shattered by individuals who take advantage of others for personal gain, it has a ripple effect that can destabilize communities and economies. Financial exploitation does not just harm the direct victims, it erodes the very fabric of society, creating an environment where exploitation becomes more common, and where people are forced to operate in an atmosphere of constant skepticism and caution. The reason that financial exploitation and fraud are so unforgivable is because they often involve a gross abuse of power. The perpetrator is typically someone who has the upper hand in terms of knowledge, resources, or position, and they use that advantage to deceive and manipulate those who are less knowledgeable or vulnerable. For example, a con artist may prey on an elderly person's trust or lack of financial expertise, convincing them to invest in fraudulent schemes that promise high returns. Similarly, a business partner might siphon funds from a shared account, taking advantage of the other party's lack of oversight or experience in financial matters. The perpetrator's actions are often driven by greed and a lack of empathy for the harm they cause, as they view the victim not as a person but as an opportunity for personal gain. This abuse of power is what makes the act so unforgivable. It's not just a momentary lapse in judgment or a mistake. It's a calculated decision to exploit someone else's vulnerability for profit. The victim, who may have trusted the perpetrator based on their position of authority or familiarity, is left feeling betrayed and powerless, unable to undo the damage that has been done. Moreover, the long-term consequences of financial exploitation extend far beyond the immediate loss of money. For many victims, recovering from financial fraud can be an incredibly slow and painful process. If they are unable to regain their financial stability, they may be forced to make significant lifestyle adjustments, such as downsizing their home, cutting back on essential expenses, or even filing for bankruptcy. The fear of living without financial security can haunt them for years, making it difficult to trust others or to rebuild their lives in a meaningful way. This may be especially true for older adults who may not have the time or resources to rebuild their finances before retirement. Their entire future may be jeopardized because of the actions of someone who knowingly deceived them. The emotional toll can be just as severe, with victims feeling a constant sense of anxiety and stress as they try to recover from their losses. The damage to their sense of security and well-being may not be easily repaired, and in many cases, they may never fully regain the stability they once had. Financial fraud, therefore, does not simply impact the victim in the short term. It has long-lasting effects that can shape the victim's life trajectory in profound ways. The actions of those who engage in financial exploitation and fraud are particularly unforgivable because they often exploit the very essence of human trust. They prey on an individual's willingness to believe in the good intentions of others, and in doing so, they rob their victims of not only money, but also their faith in humanity. These perpetrators show no regard for the emotional and psychological devastation they cause, and they do so with the knowledge that they are taking something irreplaceable from their victims. Financial exploitation in its various forms is a calculated crime, one that leaves a deep and lasting impact on its victims, both financially and emotionally. Those who engage in such acts are not just committing an offense against their victim, they are undermining the trust and security that bind society together. In a world where financial exploitation is allowed to go unchecked, the very foundation of social cooperation and trust begins to erode, leaving behind a fractured and distrustful society. One of the most unforgivable acts that can occur within a society is the violation of someone's personal privacy and the exploitation of their personal information. Privacy is a fundamental human right, and when it is violated, it undermines an individual's sense of safety, autonomy, and dignity. In the modern age where information is often stored digitally and shared across platforms, the potential for invasion of privacy has become all too real. Whether through hacking, unauthorized data sharing, or the spreading of private information without consent, those who engage in these acts are committing an invasion that goes beyond simply breaking the law. It is a violation of a person's right to control their own life and the sensitive aspects of their identity. This disregard for another person's privacy often leaves deep emotional scars, as the victim may feel exposed, vulnerable, and powerless. The emotional impact of a privacy violation is profound. For many, their private information represents a part of themselves that they want to keep secure from the public eye. Whether it is their financial data, medical history, or personal correspondence, the revelation of such details can cause anxiety, fear, and a loss of trust. The violation of privacy is not just an intrusion into a person's physical space, but it is an attack on their identity and integrity. In cases of cyberbullying, identity theft, or revenge porn, the victim is often left grappling with the fallout long after the breach has occurred. Personal details can be used to manipulate or control, causing a loss of emotional and psychological security. For instance, when private images or personal conversations are shared without consent, it can lead to feelings of shame, embarrassment, and betrayal. The victim may also experience a heightened sense of fear, knowing that their privacy can be violated again at any time. The emotional damage caused by these breaches is often so deep that it becomes difficult for the victim to trust others, leading to anxiety and a sense of isolation. Another severe aspect of privacy violations is the potential for long-lasting repercussions. Information that is stolen or shared without consent can have permanent consequences for the victim's life. For example, someone who experiences identity theft may find their credit ruined or their financial stability compromised. The process of reclaiming stolen assets or clearing one's name can be time-consuming, stressful, and costly. In other cases, people who have had their personal information exposed may be subject to harassment, stalked, or even blackmailed. These violations often have ripple effects, reaching far beyond the victim to impact their family, friends, and professional relationships. A person's reputation, once tarnished, can be hard to restore. This long-lasting damage can affect one's career prospects, social life, and mental health. In the case of sensitive or intimate information being exposed, victims may face a lifetime of emotional distress as they come to terms with the public nature of their once private lives. Furthermore, privacy violations erode the very trust that is essential for a functioning society. Trust is the foundation of all personal relationships, whether professional, familial, or romantic. When someone's privacy is violated, that trust is shattered, and the victim may struggle to form new connections or maintain existing relationships. Victims of privacy violations often become hyper-aware of potential threats to their safety and personal information. They may become suspicious of others, withdrawing from social situations or avoiding certain platforms or technologies altogether. This constant vigilance can lead to feelings of paranoia and distress, ultimately preventing the person from living a life that feels free from fear and anxiety. The betrayal felt after a breach of privacy is so deep because it goes against the expectation that others will respect our boundaries and personal space. This sense of betrayal can cause the victim to close off emotionally, struggling to trust others or to feel secure in relationships moving forward. In cases of large-scale data breaches or surveillance, the scope of the invasion of privacy can be overwhelming. For example, when companies or governments collect and misuse private data, the effects are far-reaching. A data breach in which millions of personal records are stolen can affect people's lives for years to come. Individuals may be exposed to financial fraud, targeted advertising, or identity theft. The lack of control over personal information that is taken without consent often leads to feelings of helplessness and a diminished sense of self-worth. Victims of such large-scale invasions may feel that they are powerless against the systems in place that allow these breaches to occur, and they may feel disconnected from society as a result. Additionally, the fact that these breaches often happen on such a massive scale can make the individual feel insignificant and like their concerns are overlooked by larger institutions. It becomes evident that their personal data is merely a commodity to be bought and sold, leaving the victim feeling as though their rights and dignity are secondary to the interests of corporations or governments. Moreover, privacy violations can have devastating consequences for marginalized or vulnerable groups. For those who already face discrimination or have limited social power, the exposure of their private information can result in increased harm. For example, individuals who belong to minority groups, victims of abuse, or those with stigmatized identities may suffer additional risks when their private details are exposed to the public. They may become targets for further exploitation or violence, and their ability to seek protection or support may be severely compromised. Privacy breaches can amplify existing inequalities, leaving vulnerable populations even more susceptible to harm. This is particularly true in cases where sensitive health information, financial status, or personal histories are revealed without consent. These groups, already navigating systems that may not fully protect their rights, are often left without the resources or recourse needed to recover from such violations, further entrenching their marginalization. In many cases, privacy violations are not just a result of malicious intent, but also a consequence of negligence or poor security practices. Organizations that handle sensitive personal data, whether they are businesses, schools, or government agencies, are expected to take steps to safeguard the information they collect. When these institutions fail to implement adequate security measures or expose their users to unnecessary risks, they are complicit in the violation of privacy. This negligence often leads to the breach of sensitive personal data that can then be exploited by malicious actors. In this way, the harm is not only caused by those who actively seek to exploit personal information, but also by those who fail to protect it in the first place. This failure to safeguard privacy speaks to a broader disregard for individuals' rights and their ability to maintain control over their personal lives. The responsibility for ensuring privacy is respected lies not just with individuals but also with organizations that handle private data. When these organizations fail to fulfill that responsibility, they contribute to a larger societal problem where personal privacy is seen as expendable. Finally, privacy violations represent a broader societal problem of diminishing autonomy and respect for personal boundaries. As technology advances and more personal information is shared digitally, the lines between private and public life continue to blur. In an age where nearly every aspect of our lives is online, from shopping habits and financial records to personal communications and health information, the notion of privacy is being eroded. Those who violate privacy, whether through hacking, unauthorized surveillance, or data exploitation, take advantage of this blurring of boundaries, making it harder for individuals to protect themselves. The lack of respect for personal privacy sends a message that individuals' rights to autonomy and control over their personal information are secondary to the interests of larger organizations or powerful individuals. The failure to respect privacy not only harms individuals but also undermines the principles of freedom and autonomy upon which democratic societies are built. The violation of privacy is a profound and unforgivable act that not only harms the victim but also erodes the trust and security necessary for a healthy and functioning society. Whether it occurs on an individual level or through large-scale breaches, the exploitation of private information causes emotional, psychological, and practical damage that can last a lifetime. The victim's sense of safety is shattered, and their ability to trust others and navigate their world with confidence is diminished. In a world that increasingly depends on digital systems and online platforms, the preservation of privacy becomes an essential component of personal freedom. When privacy is violated, it is not just an affront to one person, but to the values of respect, autonomy, and dignity that should guide human relationships in every sphere of life. One of the most unforgivable acts in human relationships is the deliberate manipulation of emotions for personal gain. Emotional manipulation involves exploiting another person's feelings, vulnerabilities, and emotional states to control their actions, decisions, and perceptions. The perpetrators of this type of manipulation often know exactly what buttons to press to induce feelings of guilt, fear, or insecurity, using these emotions as tools to achieve their own selfish desires. Emotional manipulation can occur in various relationships, whether familial, romantic, or professional, and it can be particularly insidious because it is often subtle, gradual, and difficult for the victim to recognize until it has deeply affected their mental and emotional well-being. Unlike physical abuse or even financial fraud, emotional manipulation often leaves no visible marks or scars, but its impact is far-reaching, insidious, and often long-lasting. Those who engage in this kind of behavior betray the trust and emotional safety that should exist within the relationship, and they exploit another person's feelings in the most callous way. The harm caused by emotional manipulation is complex, as it can lead to a variety of psychological and emotional problems for the victim. The victim of emotional manipulation often feels confused, isolated, and helpless, as they struggle to make sense of the contradictory behavior they are experiencing. The manipulator may alternate between affection and cruelty, leaving the victim in a constant state of emotional whiplash. This unpredictability creates an environment of constant anxiety, where the victim never knows what to expect from the manipulator. Over time, the victim may begin to question their own reality, wondering if they are overly sensitive or imagining the manipulation. This self-doubt erodes the victim's confidence and makes it even more difficult for them to recognize the manipulation for what it is. The manipulator may then take advantage of this confusion, using it to further control the victim's actions and decisions. Victims often feel as though they are walking on eggshells, constantly trying to avoid triggering the manipulator's wrath or making them feel unhappy, which only deepens their sense of powerlessness and despair. In more severe cases, emotional manipulation can lead to long-term psychological damage, such as anxiety, depression, or post-traumatic stress disorder (PT). The constant manipulation of the victim's emotions often results in a sense of disorientation and emotional numbness. Over time, the victim may become so accustomed to the manipulator's behavior that they lose the ability to distinguish between what is real and what is manufactured by the manipulator. They may begin to view themselves as incapable, unworthy of love, or unable to make decisions on their own. This loss of self-esteem is one of the most damaging effects of emotional manipulation, as it prevents the victim from asserting themselves or seeking help. As the victim internalizes the manipulator's messages, they may withdraw from relationships with others, as they no longer trust their own judgment or feel confident in their ability to navigate social interactions. The manipulator may even go so far as to isolate the victim from friends and family, further reinforcing their control over the victim's life. The psychological toll of emotional manipulation often lasts long after the relationship has ended, with victims struggling to trust others or rebuild their sense of self-worth. One of the most insidious aspects of emotional manipulation is that it can be difficult for the victim to recognize when they are being manipulated. Unlike physical abuse, where the signs are often visible, emotional manipulation can be subtle and disguised as caring behavior, concern, or love. The manipulator may use guilt-tripping, passive-aggressive behavior, or even gaslighting to keep the victim in a state of confusion. Gaslighting in particular is a powerful form of emotional manipulation in which the manipulator systematically denies or distorts the victim's perception of reality, causing them to doubt their own memory, perception, or judgment. The manipulator may deny things they have said or done, turning the victim's perception of events upside down. This makes the victim question their own sanity, which in turn makes them more reliant on the manipulator for guidance and validation. The manipulator then uses this dependence to maintain control over the victim, as the victim becomes more convinced that they are incapable of seeing the truth on their own. The manipulator's ability to distort reality in this way is what makes emotional manipulation so dangerous. It is not just about controlling the victim's actions, but about warping their sense of self and their understanding of the world around them. In romantic relationships, emotional manipulation is especially damaging because it often exploits the very feelings that are meant to bring two people closer together: love, trust, and intimacy. A manipulative partner may use these feelings to control their partner's behavior, making them feel responsible for the manipulator's emotional well-being, or convincing them that they are the only person who truly understands them. The manipulator may try to create an unhealthy sense of dependency, where the victim feels as though they cannot live without the manipulator's affection or approval. They may even convince the victim that they are unworthy of love or that no one else would ever accept them. This emotional dependence can make it extremely difficult for the victim to break free from the relationship, as they are convinced that their worth is tied to the manipulator's validation. The victim may even feel guilty for wanting to leave, believing that doing so would be a betrayal, or that the manipulator would not be able to survive without them. This kind of manipulation creates a toxic dynamic where one person holds all the power, and the other is left feeling small, helpless, and isolated. In the workplace, emotional manipulation can be just as damaging, as it undermines professional relationships and creates an environment of fear and insecurity. A manipulative boss, for example, may play employees against each other, using favoritism or the threat of punishment to control their behavior. They may also use guilt to manipulate employees into taking on more work than they can handle, or they may pressure them into making decisions that benefit the boss at the employee's expense. In some cases, the manipulator may pretend to be supportive or caring in order to gain the employee's trust, only to later exploit that trust for their own benefit. This kind of manipulation leads to a toxic work environment where employees are constantly walking on edge, unsure of how to please their boss or avoid punishment. It erodes trust within the team as employees become wary of each other and begin to distrust the motives of those in positions of authority. The long-term effects of emotional manipulation in the workplace can lead to burnout, low morale, and a lack of motivation, as employees feel drained, disrespected, and undervalued. The most unforgivable aspect of emotional manipulation is the way it undermines a person's autonomy and sense of self. Manipulators often prey on the victim's insecurities, vulnerabilities, and emotional needs, using them as leverage to gain control. They exploit the victim's desire for love, validation, or approval, twisting these natural emotions into tools of manipulation. The victim may end up making decisions that go against their own values or interests, simply to please the manipulator or avoid conflict. In the worst cases, the victim may lose sight of who they truly are, becoming so dependent on the manipulator for validation that they cannot make decisions without the manipulator's input or approval. The manipulator's control over the victim's emotions creates a false reality, where the victim's needs and desires are secondary to the manipulator's wants. Over time, the victim may begin to feel like they have no agency in their own life, that they are powerless to make choices or assert their own identity. This loss of autonomy is one of the most destructive effects of emotional manipulation, as it leaves the victim feeling helpless, confused, and disconnected from their true self. In all its forms, emotional manipulation is one of the most damaging and unforgivable actions a person can commit. It exploits the deepest parts of human vulnerability, using trust and emotional connection as tools for control. The harm it causes is profound and lasting, affecting not just the victim's immediate emotional state, but also their ability to trust, love, and navigate relationships in the future. Those who engage in emotional manipulation are fully aware of the damage they cause, making their actions all the more reprehensible. The deep psychological toll left by emotional manipulation often extends far beyond the relationship itself, leaving scars that can take years to heal. The perpetrator's lack of empathy and disregard for the victim's emotional well-being is what makes this form of manipulation so unforgivable. It goes beyond simple betrayal to the destruction of the victim's emotional autonomy and sense of self.